Thank you everyone for being here. Again, a huge thank you to our sponsors for their support in bringing our speaker, Anthony Amore, to Tucson tonight. The UA Museum of Art's Fall Speaker Series is generously supported by Tim Haggard of Long Realty, specializing in unique and historic properties. This individual talk is also sponsored by Lauren and David Rabb. Thank you very much for your support. And it is my pleasure, my honor, tonight to introduce Anthony Amore, art theft expert, investigator, and security practitioner. Presently, he is Director of Security and Chief Investigator at the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, where he is charged with the ongoing efforts to recover 13 works of art stolen from the museum on March 18, 1990, and what is still the single largest property theft in the world. Prior to his current role at the Gardner Museum, Anthony worked for 15 years in various capacities for the Department of Homeland Security, including overseeing the efforts of the then newly formed Transportation Security Administration post-September 11th at Logan International Airport. He is co-author of the true crime bestseller Stealing Rembrandts, The Untold Story of Notorious Art Heist, and the author of the best-selling book The Art of the Con, the most notorious fakes, frauds, and forgeries in the art world. He published his third book, The Woman Who Stole Vermeer, The True Story of Rose Dugdale and the Rustboro House Heist in 2020. We have been looking forward to Anthony's visits for some time now. There are all of us at the museum, and many of us I know in Tucson as well. In 2017, shortly after our museum recovered our stolen painting, Woman Ochre, after more than 30 years, Anthony published an article about the crime and the observer. We knew that the recovery of Woman Ochre was incredible, but seeing that it caught the attention of Anthony, especially the chief investigator of the Gardner heist, was a seriously profound moment for all of us at the museum. So I just want to read an excerpt of this article for you. Though this is a tough case, I'm envious of the investigators from the FBI and the University of Arizona Police Department who are trying to identify the perpetrators responsible for the heist. The statute of limitations has expired, and there's no one alive yet to charge with possession of stolen property. In the case I'm investigating, we have the opposite problem. We believe we know who's behind the heist, but the art remains missing. For the UA Museum of Art, the relief of knowing the painting is back home must be the ultimate comfort. The identity of the perpetrators, by comparison, is a frustration-free whodunit. We hope that one day soon, the artwork from the Gardner Museum will be returned and that they too can have the same peace of mind as we do at the museum. But thank you so much, Anthony, for being here. Join me all in welcoming Anthony Amore to
Thank you. Oh, good. Thank you, Chelsea. I should mention, you guys have a star in Chelsea here at this museum. Home to Toledo has made my trip so easy. It's just been wonderful, so I want to thank you. And I also want to thank Warren and David for sponsoring this event, and I'm very excited to be here. The Woman Ochre story is something that I've paid a lot of attention to in my career. So I've been at the Gardner Museum for 17 years looking for these paintings, and I thought I'd be there 4 or 5 years. Move on after I get the paintings and go find a new challenge. And little did I know that my whole entire life and career would be diverted and pull me in and keep me there until we get these things. So it's a really important way to start this talk because, let me make sure I get this right. Good. So I wrote this book, Stealing Rembrandts, a while ago now, and I wrote it because when I first started at the Gardner Museum, I had come from spending my entire career, which is now the first half of my career, trying to prevent bad people from hurting people who are traveling on airplanes and then ultimately in other modes of transportation. So it was always about countering terrorism. And then after I had accomplished everything I felt I wanted to for the government and getting, I have to remember I'm not speaking to a New England audience, so a couple of rules. First, when I say the word art, I mean art. So forgive me when I keep, there's a lot of Massachusetts people here anyway, so try to bear with my accent. I'll do my best to pronounce my R's. But a lot of these, at Logan Airport, that's where the two aircraft that struck the Twin Towers departed from. So it was a spotlight airport, there was a lot of work to be done, and we got everything going the way we wanted it to, and then I felt I wanted a new challenge. And, you know, I had worked at the airport from which, or the location from which the biggest terrorist attack in our history was launched, and then I saw that the museum where the biggest property theft in history occurred was looking for someone who could do security and an investigation, which is an unenviable thing for a museum. But I had this rare combination. So usually, like if you're an FBI agent, you don't do security as well, but just my background happened to mesh the two, so I was a good fit at the Gardner. And again, I didn't think I'd be there very long, and the way I had to make this shift from terrorism to art theft, and the only way I knew how was just to delve into an enormous, ridiculous, unmanageable amount of research. And I said, I'm going to research, and I created a database of every art heist that's happened in history, every major art heist. So for tonight's purposes, one caveat is I'm talking about a heist of very valuable art. I'm not talking about smaller thefts. So I built this database, and in it I was going to categorize everything about every art heist. When I say everything, I mean day of the week, time of day, number of perpetrators, was there violence used, who were the artists, were the paintings found, how far from the crime scene were they found, you name it, right? It's an enormous spreadsheet. So I started populating it and looking into these heists, and this was 2005, right? And that doesn't seem that long ago, but most of my work was on microfiche, right? Which is really crazy to think about now, because, you know, we're at a university, but when I speak, sometimes I go back to my alma mater and speak about heists, and I mention microfiche, and students are there, and they're looking at me like, what are you talking about, right? Because now you can do all this research right online, it's a piece of cake. But I was going through this, and the thing I found really quickly was that there are too many art heists to do that in a manageable amount of time. And that's the biggest lesson I learned right away, is that art theft is a major problem worldwide. It happens constantly, right, of all sorts of pieces of art. There's a nightly news bulletin that comes out every night for people who do what I do, and it tells you what was stolen last night, what was looted, all kinds of crimes in the art world. So I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to focus on Rembrandt, because we lost 3 Rembrandts in the Gardner heist, and he's as good as any. And they were taken in a unique manner. So I started doing the research, and over a number of years, I found 82 heists at the time, and I researched everything about them, and I was keeping the stories and giving them to my assistant and saying, hey, file these for me and put them in good order, because I think they'll make a good book someday. And that's why I wrote this book, because I felt like these stories are worth telling for a really important reason, and that is people don't understand the truth about art heists. And if I can tell these stories in a compelling way, which I hope you find compelling, then maybe people will look at them differently and try to protect the art in a different way. And investigators will have a good stepping off point, because every time I look at a heist, you see, like the chief of police in the area will say, this was clearly the work of professionals. They always say that, right? But my research has shown there are no professionals. People don't steal art more than once, right? So again, talk about masterpieces. In almost every case, they steal these masterpieces and they can't sell them, and they never do it again. And they go back to the other crimes that they constantly do, because the people who steal art almost every time are just career criminals who steal everything under the sun. And they see paintings, and art seems like a relatively easy, high value thing to steal, so they concentrate on art. But then they can't monetize it, so they don't do it again. Now, one other caveat for you, and this is my favorite part about my work, is that everything I'm going to tell you about art heist tonight is under this normal curve, and every case is the same. You could create a profile of the thief, you could create a profile of why they did it, etc. But there's always an outlier, right? And the outliers are the things that really interest me the most. So I'll point those out to you tonight while I'm telling you about what really happens and I feel like this book has been successful because now when a major heist happens, you hear the FBI and you hear the police, and in some cases Homeland Security, talk about it in a different way, have a better understanding of who does this and what they should be looking for. So I mentioned that art heist and art theft is a major problem worldwide, right? So this is a rather old slide from Interpol. I think it's about a decade old. And the thing I'd point out to you is this number right here, 46,000 works of art are in the Interpol database, right? So obviously it's a big problem. You have 46,000 stolen works. But what's even more interesting is that that's just a fraction of what's stolen out there. So if you look at the Art Loss Register database, and that's a for-profit database, they have over 200,000 pieces in there. If you look at the FBI's National Stolen Art File, they have much more than this. I think they have between 1 and 200,000 missing works, but those are American, right? And then if you go to the Carabinieri in Italy, they have a whole other database. And interestingly and maddeningly, I can't even say the word now. It's madden, why can't I say the word? Say it for me. Mattingly. I don't want to say it because I'm thinking of Don Mattingly from the Yankees. I'm saying, why am I thinking of the Yankees? So what's interesting is that these databases don't match. Right? You would think that there's just this one number of stolen works, but that's not true. So a few years ago, there was thought to be a Rembrandt that was stolen, but they didn't name what work it was. So I went to the Italian database. There's one in Germany, mostly for looted things. I went to Interpol, FBI. None of them had it, but they all had different Rembrandts in there. Now, the one they all have in common is are mine. But you can see all these different Rembrandts in there. So there's an enormous amount of stolen and missing art out there. Of course, this thing, this beautiful work, this unbelievable story, I was transfixed by it when I was making my database, and I came upon the story years ago. And I was like, my God, this painting was said to be cut from its frame, and nobody has any idea where it is, and it's very, very valuable. And it intrigued me, so I was always following and setting Google alerts for this de Kooning painting, Woman Ochre, to see if anything would come up. And thank you, heaven. It did. But a lot about this theft is the outlier I mentioned, right? Because as I'm going to show you, the motive is always money. So when you think about why someone stole a painting and what the reason was, and you think about these different motives, most of the ones that are coming into your mind right now are from Hollywood and are untrue. The motive is always just money, right? They're not stolen because Dr. No wants this special little Degas work that is insignificant to most of the world, but he wants to look at it with his brandy sniffer like these guys do, right? So this is what people think of when they think of art theft, mainly. And they get it from Hollywood, and that makes sense because most people, this audience might be different, but how many of you in the audience have had a multi-million-dollar painting stolen from you? You haven't, right? Nobody here. And if there are, please see Chelsea later. Maybe you can loan it when we get it back. But how would you know? All you know is what you see in the movies, right? And a lot of times when they're stolen or recovered, nobody tells the press about what really happened. Because, like, when we get the Gardner paintings back, I can tell you right now, I'm not going to be able to tell the whole story. I guarantee you I'm not going to be able to tell the whole story. But this is what you picture. So in the center, of course, is Thomas Crown, right? I only saw that a few years ago. And there's nothing in that movie that's anywhere close to the real world in terms of how museums operate, museum security, fire safety, the insurance investigator going into the police department and kicking her feet up on a desk. They would, especially in Boston, forget it, right? So on the left, you have Catherine Zeta-Jones. How many of you have seen that movie, Entrapment, with Sean Connery, right? Only a few hands went up, but most of you have seen it. And this is a famous scene. She's blindfolded, and he's teaching her how to be an art thief, and she's making her way around these red laser beams, the motion sensors. And an interesting thing about this, it's the perfect illustration of how Hollywood depicts it incorrectly. So number one, as a security person, I can tell you, and I think Lewis would be able to tell you the same, motion sensors do not look like that. We don't have red laser beams that shoot this, these beams in different directions. They're invisible, right? Why would we tell you, hey, take a step to the left, a step to the right, 2 steps forward? They just cover the whole room. You set it up and it covers the entire room and it's invisible. Secondly, I've talked to you about this database. I still maintain this database of heists, and it has over 1,500 heists in it now. And not one time ever in history, I promise you, have I ever found a heist in which the thief was wearing a blindfold. Because why would you, right? So it's just crazy. So that's how Hollywood depicts it. But on the right, I can see in the audience there's people around my age, and you'll remember. Oh, it's on your left. Yeah. Okay. You'll remember Robert Wagner in It Takes a Thief, right? How many of you remember that show? Does anybody remember what the character's name was? Alexander Monday. Okay. And he was the perfect Hollywood depiction. Like Pierce Brosnan, he's super handsome. He's a cat burglar, lives in this beautiful apartment, and repels through the skylight in a balaclava with black on and hovers over the thing. That's how that show worked, and it's never happens in real life. So I'm going to take you to the reality of art now. There's not a Pierce Brosnan in the bunch there. So, top left-hand corner is a guy named Florian Monday, and he's from Rhode Island, but he goes to Massachusetts, and he's a criminal. He's better educated than your average crook. He went to Providence College, he got a degree. His mother taught him a lot about art and antiques. Not because she wanted him to steal them one day, but because it was her son. And he just went through a life of crime. And like a lot of these people that do these big heists, they have these visions of grandeur for themselves, right? So he tried to be a rock and roll star. He had a band called Florian and the Mondos, and they actually put out a couple of records. And so there's a commonality with a lot of these people who steal art who are involved in music as well, and that's the case here, allegedly. So he, the guy on the right, his name is David Acquafresca, and he's one of Monday's henchmen. The guy on the far right is a guy named Miles Connor. He's from Massachusetts, and he's the greatest art thief in the entire world, right? But notice I keep mentioning Massachusetts, because Massachusetts, my home state, is the home of all the horrible crimes, right? You can tie any sort of really bad crime back to Massachusetts. It's almost a party trick for me at this point. Miles is another outlier, and I've become really good friends with him. He's been fascinated by him. And because I feel like, have you ever seen the show Mindhunter, or read the book Mindhunter, where this FBI agent that started the profiling program, he wanted to learn about serial killers, so he went out and interviewed a lot of serial killers. So I was inspired by him. I became friendly with him. And when I started at the Gardner, I went on and started interviewing a lot of art thieves, guys who've stolen art. More than I can remember now, but just to get a sense of what their thoughts were at the time. And they love to tell their story, because a lot of them have these really big egos. Miles was a rock and roll star, another musician. He was a big rock and roll star in Massachusetts. And of course, the veins of my existence there in drawings beneath. But remember Al Monday there. In 1972, he orchestrated a major heist at the Worcester Art Museum. Now, Massachusetts, we pronounce that word Worcester, not Worcester. So, have you ever been to Worcester? Anybody been to Worcester? To the museum? Wow, impressive, right? So it's a really good museum, really good. But it's in Worcester, so no one, except for a couple of people here and there go, and even people in Worcester don't go to this museum. It's beautiful. Worcester's the butt of almost every joke back in the Commonwealth. Al told me his story, and he said he was taking some courses at Assumption College, and Al was stealing everything. That's why they started, his name's Florian, but they started calling him Al because he was like Al Monday, and It Takes a Thief. So everyone knows it was Al Monday now. And he would steal anything that wasn't nailed down. And it's true that in the black market, you do get about 10% of the value of an item. That's a rule of thumb. So if he stole a car that was worth $2,500, he's going to get $250 for it. And that's not the high life that Al envisions for himself. So he says one day he's coming out of class at Assumption College, and across the street he sees the Worcester Art Museum, and it hits him, I should rob the museum. If I steal a multi-million-dollar painting and get 10% for it, now we're talking money-wise, right? Now, Assumption College is not across the street from Worcester Art Museum, but he loves to give his stories this sort of drama. So he goes to the museum, absolutely beautiful place. And isn't it a great photo? There were other photos that doesn't look that great, but that's a good photo. So he goes to the museum and he starts casing the place. And this is an important point about these people who steal art. He doesn't look for his favorite artist like in the movies. His favorite artist is Renoir. Don't ask me why, but Renoir, right? And they have Renoir there, but he doesn't try to steal those. He focuses on the paintings that will get him the most money. So he sets his sights on two paintings by Gauguin, a Picasso, and Rembrandt. And Rembrandt is at the heart of so many art heists. He's the most often stolen artist. When you look at per work, he's number one. And there's a reason for that. There's a reason why Picasso's up there too, and Andy Warhol. It's because these guys that steal art are not art experts. They just know the big names, and they know the big name means big money. That's it, right? They don't study art. They don't go to the library and research. That's why they don't steal Rothko. Right? Rothko's really valuable, but if you dropped out of high school as a freshman, you've never heard of Rothko, chances are, but you've heard of Rembrandt, and you've heard the name Picasso. So Al goes to this museum, he looks at those four paintings, and this is a reason why museums get robbed often, because you can go into a museum, the purpose is for all of us to go to a museum and stand there and just look at the painting. And if you just stand there and look, no one's going to bother you, right? And all of us, honest people, go and we do it to enjoy the art. A guy like Al goes in and he's looking at how it's hung on the wall, but you can't tell that if you're a guard. He's looking at where the cameras are. He's looking at the guards, and he's seeing that they're all elderly gentlemen, they're not armed. He's looking at the escape route, because Al's plan is for the paintings to be stolen in broad daylight, and that's where most paintings are stolen from museums, because it's a lot easier. Right? The smash and grab approach is much easier than trying to break into a museum, which is like a fortress at night. But in the daytime, the doors are wide open. We beg you, Miriam's here, you beg people to come in and get close to the paintings and observe them. They pay you to bring people in here, right? So it's a different ball game. Museums are so egalitarian. People don't think of them that way, but they are. The whole purpose is, hey, come in and enjoy these things that, the greatest treasures of mankind. So Al does this a bunch of times. Then he brings a couple of henchmen with him, these two young guys in their very early 20s, because he's smart enough to have them do the heist, right? He's not going to put his neck on the line. He's going to mastermind it and send them, and he shows them where they are and how to take them and what the plan is. So this is going to happen in May of 1972. They go to Al's house. They steal a getaway car. One of the Gauguin paintings, it's called The Brooding Woman, is very large and it's on a panel, so it wouldn't fit into a back seat easily. So Al tells the guys, steal a station wagon. And in 1972, there were no compact station wagons, right? Station wagons were all big, gigantic beach wagons with the big way back, right? Perfect for the Gauguin painting. They steal the car like you or I buy a cup of coffee. That's child's play. They have the car, they go to Al's house, they go over the plan one last time. He gives them both blue windbreakers to wear, because he supposes correctly that if they are dressed similarly and they try to take a painting off a wall while people are in the gallery, no one's going to say anything. They're going to assume they work there. Right?
No kidding.
Now, how many of you have been at a museum while they were taking a painting off the wall? You probably saw a theft, right? Because we don't move paintings when the museums are open. Right?
Yeah.
So You should go back in time and contact the authorities and tell them to start painting tickets from the wall. It's really bad policy to do that in the middle of the day, right? So people aren't likely, nobody wants to stand up and say, hey, what are you doing? Especially if people are dressed the same and they're going about their business, right? Finally, Al says, okay, time to go. The guys won't go. And why? Because they ask where their gun is. Where's our gun? And Al says, wait a minute, what gun? There's no gun in this plan. You're two young, tough guys. You don't need a gun. The guards are elderly gentlemen. They're unarmed. They can't stop you. And they say, we're professionals. We're not doing it without a gun. So Al goes and gets a stolen revolver he has in his bedroom. And he gives it to them, and now they're happy. They're walking out of the house, and they look inside, and there's no bullets. They go back inside. They have another back and forth, and Al gives them one bullet. And I can remember him telling me, he handed it, and then he pulled it back, and he said, don't put blood on my paintings. And he meant that figuratively. He understood that if you shoot somebody in the commission of an art heist, you have escalated this crime big time, right? The amount of police resources that are going to be dedicated to that heist are going to be enormous. And they're like, of course not, we're not going to shoot anybody. So they go off, they go to the museum. Now you see, does this have a laser on it? Well, it doesn't matter. So they come in this way. Now this is Renaissance Hall at Worcester Art Museum. They have one of the greatest collections of antique mosaics in the world. And at the time, in 1972, these rails were not around that mosaic. So, but the thieves walk in, and then they're heading up to that staircase because the paintings are all on the second floor. And just to the left of the staircase, there's a bench, and there's two high school seniors, females, who are particularly attractive. And these two young early guys in their early 20s, now Al's told them, don't draw attention to yourself. Do like they say in The Godfather. Don't look anybody in the eye, but don't look away either. Don't run out, but don't walk. Just be indistinguishable. Oh, yeah, we know. So they see these two girls, and they go over to the girls and say, you might want to sit over here, something big's going to happen. so already they're not following the rules. Right? This doesn't sound like Pierce Brosnan, Thomas Crown, right? So the girls sit down, they go upstairs, and just like Al supposes, they take the 4 paintings off the wall, nobody says a word to them. They walk back down the stairs, and as they come down the stairs to leave, because the exit's right here, they come across and they walk right onto the mosaic. And that alerts the guard, an older gentleman here, named Phil Evans. And he sees them on the mosaic, and he yells for them to stop. And they stop, and he goes, get off the mosaic. But then he notices, thank God, that they're carrying 4 paintings with them, right? So he yells for them to stop again, and they take the gun and they shoot him. Right? Now imagine, if you've ever heard a gun fired and you didn't have ear protection on, it's memorable. And imagine hearing that in a big cement and marble hall, right? It's piercing, so people hit the floor, people scream, the poor guard's on the floor, he's bleeding, he's got a really bad, he's shot in a really bad area. And the thieves walk outside with the paintings. Everybody attends to the guard. Luckily for the guard, he had been given directions to a nurse at the time, and she saved his life. Right? But now the guys are gone with the paint. For all their bumbling, they're gone with the paintings. They go outside, the station wagon's right outside the door. The driver puts the 3 smaller paintings in the back seat. He gets behind the wheel. His accomplice, remember I told you why they stole the station wagon? He takes the big Gauguin painting and puts it on the roof of the car and holds it like this. He really did this. And totally obviates the need for a station wagon, but that's what he did. And he takes off with Gauguin grooming the woman on the roof of the car. When the thieves are done with this heist, you have to remember it's just another crime. They commit all sorts of crimes, and they'll be committing another in a couple of weeks. But they go to their local watering hole, where everybody knows them. And it's probably around 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And it's Worcester, so it's packed at 2 or 3 o'clock. Right? So they sit down and they have a couple of drinks to toast themselves what they did. But again, this isn't, the end of their careers. This is just another job for them. And while they're having their drinks, on the televisions in the bar, it stops and it goes to breaking news. right? So remember, this is 1972. Many of you will remember there used to be a time where when the news said breaking news, that meant news was breaking. It was something. I remember like getting that funny feeling in your stomach, like someone important must have died, or we just fired missiles at some country, or something serious. So everyone looks, and then it's a local news anchor, so everybody goes to hush, right? This is something out of Worcester. And the news anchor says, breaking news out of Worcester Museum, a heist has occurred, Rembrandt, Gauguin, Picasso, a guard is shot in critical condition, the thieves are armed and dangerous, and they have not been apprehended. FBI and Worcester police are on scene, details at 6. So, holy moly, everybody in this bar is abuzz that we must know, who must have done this, this is unbelievable. And the two guys that did it are right in there, and what do you think they do? They said, hey, that was us. This is a true story I'm telling you. This is a true story. Is there anybody here tonight that's in law enforcement or an investigator of any kind? Okay, well, I've been one for 32 years. That's a good lead. When guys admit to a crime in front of their community, you should follow up on it. And the police did, and they arrested these guys. And they knew they worked for Al Mundy, so they were on their way. So they go to Al Mundy's house, and he won't let them in. And but they let him know, we're on to you. He tells them to get lost. Now here's the St. Bartholomew painting by Rembrandt that was stolen. It's a spectacular painting. It's in the movie American Hustle with Christian Bale and Bradley Cooper. And they say in the movie that it's a fake, but it's not a fake. It's astounding, it's beautiful. And many of you are art lovers, which I love talking to museum audiences because you understand that this is a high resolution image I'm looking at right here from the Worcester Art Museum, and it's nothing. You have to see the painting in person, right? It's just like Woman Ogre. You can see all the pictures in the world of it, big deal, right? Until I got there today and got to see it, thank you, Chelsea. Amazing, it's just an amazing thing to see these things. Paintings are three-dimensional, or more. I mean, when you get to see it in person. So if you have a favorite painting and you have the means, try to see it in person. When you look at this in life, you see the glow coming from Rembrandt, which is really a great hallmark of Rembrandt's work, right? His use of light, which, whenever I used to go into a shopping mall and I'd see Thomas Kincaid, the master of light. Go easy, Thomas. So, this painting resonates with me too because from grades 1 through 8 in Providence, Rhode Island, I went to St. Bartholomew School. And in this painting, I don't know if you probably can't make it out, you can't. His hand is here. And his hand, he's holding a flaying knife. And the great masters would paint modern saints standing by or holding or near the instrument of their martyrdom. And St. Bartholomew was skinned alive at the stake. So he's holding a flaying knife. And when I was in the first grade, the principal, Sister Martina, told us St. Bartholomew was skinned alive at the stake. And when you're 6, that sticks with you. 50 years later, I'm in Arizona talking about Sister Martina. Do you see the impact art? So this is a really important painting, and as I mentioned, Rembrandt is this target of art thieves because they just know there's value attached to it. So Al has to get rid of this painting, not let it dump it, he wants to sell it. But there's no buyers because it's instantly too well known. It's highly recognizable. It's on the front page of papers, as I mentioned. I did microfiche research, and this was a front page story internationally, right? So who's going to buy it? There are no buyers for masterworks that, if you pay 10%, even pennies on the dollar, it can only get that rich person who can give you that money in trouble. Who's going to give you $2 million for a painting that they can't show anybody? Right? People buy paintings like this because they want to show them off, and thank God they do, right? So he can't find a buyer, he has to hide the paintings, And he takes the paintings to Johnston, Rhode Island. And in Johnston, Rhode Island, there's a place called the Bacillo Pig Farm. And that's where he hides these paintings, right? Is that something you see in the movies, a pig farm? He hides these paintings in a hayloft at a pig farm. And not just any pig farm, the most polluted site in the United States of America. It was the first EPA Superfund site. And after this whole affair, the place blew up. All hundreds of acres of hazardous waste in 55-gallon drums, controlled by an organization in Rhode Island called the Mafia. So it's a reliable hiding place for him, but no authorities would ever think they're there. However, there's something working against now. Though the police know he's involved, they have to dot I's and cross T's, right? When they told to get lost, they had to get lost. While this is going on, and it's front page news of Worcester, there are two very violent criminals who are awaiting sentencing for a home invasion. And they're out on bail, incredibly. And they know they have to curry some favor with the judge. And they get the idea, if we can get these paintings back, we'll get a break in our sentence. So they go to Monday's house, and they do what the cops can't do. He answers the door, they put a gun in his chest. And they say, bring us to the paintings. And he says, aye, aye. And they go to the pig farm, and they get the paintings back, and the two home invaders get a tiny little sentence reduction. And it's a big ruckus in the courthouse, but the paintings come back. And here's the paintings. That's a couple of FBI agents and two Worcester police officers. There's the brooding woman that was supposed to be in the back of the station wagon. There's the Rembrandt without its frame, because Al Monday felt the frame, believe it or not, was weighing him down. So he took the frame off and threw it in a river. And here's the Picasso. That's the other hand. So this is an important story historically, because it illustrates so much about art. First of all, historically, it's the first time a museum is robbed at gunpoint. But it also really shows you that these guys, even seasoned crooks who fence stolen items for a living, can't get rid of these paintings because there's no buyers for them, right? But that doesn't mean violence wouldn't be part of it. And that's what happened in Worcester. But there's the guard. He recovered. And the night that they put the painting back up, something University of Arizona Art Museum would never have done. They put the painting back up. They invite trustees and well-to-do people in the area, and they forget it, like the guard who almost died in this affair. At the last minute, they're like, oh my God, we're going to get Phil here too. So they invited Phil, and that's Phil Evans, who was shot that day. Now, that started a precedent, because it wasn't long after, in 1975, that there was another armed robbery of very valuable paintings, in fact, a Rembrandt from the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. Has anybody been to the MFA? Oh, wow. That's amazing. That's great. How many of you have been to the Gardner Museum? A little less. Not impressed, Arizona. Need to do better. The Gardner's just across the street. Next time. So, the Gardner is on the Fenway. The Fenway curves around. You go left and you go by the MFA. So, the reason I show you this overhead view is in 1975, thieves robbed the MFA. And what they did was they pulled into that circular drive, which is really smart, because if you get away with the painting and you take off on the Fenway and there's no Red Sox game, there's no traffic, right? And you go any direction from there. You can go north, south, east, west on the highway. So if the police are even a minute behind you, they're not going to get you unless they're incredibly lucky. So it's a smart plan, and the thieves had somebody pretend their car had died up on the Fenway. So when the police were coming, they'd have a tough time responding. It'd be a jam. What these thieves do, they pull up in a van, again, circular drive, they walk up the stairs into the museum. There was no big admission desk there at the time. They go right to the second floor, and they choose wisely. They go right for this painting. At the time, it was called Portrait of Elsbeth Van Rijn. It was thought to be Rembrandt's sister. The Rembrandt Research Project, which is this team of Rembrandt experts, determined it is not his sister. It's just a portrait of a girl wearing a gold trimmed cloak. But it's one of his finest examples of his handiwork. It's sometimes used to compare paintings that might be Rembrandt to his actual work, because this is such a fine work. It's privately owned, so at the time it was at the MFA on loan from the family of Robert Tree Payne, who signed the Declaration of Independence. They go up to the second floor to get this painting, and the guards come over, again, elderly gentlemen, they come over because they see these guys are going up to the painting, and they just shove them away, and they pull the painting off the wall. It's on an oak panel, and they run back down the stairs. And when they get near the entrance, again, in a big cavernous marble and cement hall, they fire warning shots inside the museum. And I've talked to people who are there, and they're obviously petrified by this, right? And they run down the stairs towards the van, almost like in a movie. They turn and they fire at the staircase. So no innocent, no wannabe hero is going to chase them. But this guy does. He's a guard, he's a retired Boston police officer, he's unarmed, but he doesn't care. He's chasing that painting, and he's going to get the painting. And those of you who've worked in museums or work in the art world know that you develop this affinity for paintings where you, believe it or not, you would put your life on the line for a painting, especially one you really care about, right? It sounds outlandish, but it's entirely true. And he did it. And he ran and chased after them. They're getting into the van, and he grabs the painting, and there's a tug of war with this Rembrandt masterwork. And someone inside the van takes a machine gun and puts it to his head, and the mastermind who robbed this painting yells, "Stop!" Because he knows if you shoot this guy, all hell's going to break loose, right? So they don't shoot him, they just smash him in the head with the gun. That's why I show his injury here. And they make off in a cloud of dust. And unlike Worcester, there's no evidence, there's no foolish declarations that we stole the paintings. There's no forensics to go on. There's just nothing. And when this painting's gone, the MFA puts another painting in its place. And rest on the insurance company maybe to investigate it and you move on. And it's a shame, because I've seen that painting in person. It's not often you get to see it in person. But it'll buckle your knees. It is that beautiful. I mean it. Astoundingly beautiful. So, painting's gone. No one knows where it went. Now this guy is Miles Connor. I showed him to you earlier. He's the unique outlier in art theft. He's a member of Mensa. He's committed every sort of crime you can imagine. He's the most storied criminal in Massachusetts history. He's robbed every museum you could think of. And I know him very, very, very well. I hate to say this, but I consider him a friend. And he's forgotten heists that he's pulled off because he's robbed so much stuff. Right? He actually filled a tractor trailer with art that he had stolen. But his real passion is samurai swords. So he would illicitly sell minor pieces of art and antiques for samurai swords. Miles is in prison in this picture, as he spent a greater part of his life there. In 1973, he and some friends went up to Maine to the Woolworth estate, and they broke in and they stole a whole bunch of art. They stole mostly antiques, though. Simon Willard grandfather clocks and silver, pieces like that. But Miles couldn't help himself and stole 3 paintings by the Wyatts. Now he knows you can't sell them. He knows it, but he's a risk taker. It's what he does. He's a career criminal, and he stole these 3 Wyatts. And a few years later, he tried to sell them on Cape Cod, outside on the strip mall. And he met a buyer, and again, he's just a major risk taker. He knows better. He gets word there's a buyer. He goes to the strip mall, and the buyer, they talk about a price, and the buyer agrees, and he takes out his wallet and hands Miles his FBI badge, because he's not a buyer, he's the FBI, and Miles is arrested. The state police, FBI take him into custody. He's on bail at the time for stealing some other art in Massachusetts. So now they have him on state and federal charges, and they want to give consecutive sentences, so he goes away for a very long time. When they put him in the car, you say to him, "Let's see you get out of this one, Connor." And he says, "You watch me." And then the guy, one of the troopers, knows him and said, "Well, let me tell you, Miles, it's going to take a Rembrandt to get you out of this one." That's who stole this painting. They told him it's going to take a Rembrandt to get out of this, so he went and stole a Rembrandt. So he's locked up. This painting is hidden by one of his friends. He puts word out saying, hey, I didn't steal this thing, but I can get that Rembrandt back for you. At the time, a few months later, this was auctioned off, and it was the most valuable Dutch painting ever sold at the time. And so there was a lot of spotlight on this. So the authorities agreed, if you can get this painting back, we'll give you a break on your sentencing. And he got it back through a friend, and they combined the state and federal charges and reduced them, and he was out in no time. So the reason this is really important is because this is an outlier case again. He didn't steal that Rembrandt for money. He stole it as a get-out-of-jail-free card. Right? And what has happened in history since then, because this was such a big scale, is that when thieves steal a painting and they can't sell it, this gives them a reason to keep it, because maybe they can use it if they get into trouble. And that happens a lot now. And this is the first time it happened. It was with the Rembrandt, it was Miles Connor. And again, he's an outlier because he's stolen art very, very many times. He was in prison when the Gardner Museum was robbed. So it's not just these major crimes like this, it's just, I shouldn't say major crimes, not just these crimes I talked about tonight, but Rembrandt is stolen so frequently, like this portrait of Jacob de Geyn III. It's called the Takeaway Rembrandt because it's been stolen 4 times from the Dulwich Picture Gallery. 4 times. That's the first time. The thief came in and stole 9 pieces, and he stole smaller pieces because he broke into the museum through this employee entrance. He cut a hole in the wooden door, and they called it the rubber bone thief because he crawled through this tiny hole and stole small paintings and took them back out the hole. And when I look at this from a security point of view, I think to myself, I can see why he went in that way, but why didn't he just open the door and his way out? But that's what he did. And then this enterprising detective here is telling his boss, I think I found out how he got in here. That's the caption of that story. But that was recovered. It was stolen again 4 years later by a guy who went into the museum, took the painting off the wall, put it in his bicycle, and rode away. And they called the police. The police caught him while he was riding his bicycle, and they pulled him over, and they said, what do you think you're doing? He said, I'm just taking it home to sketch it. Right? So museums don't have to just worry about these thieves, they have to worry about nutters, too, because people come in and do crazy things to art. In fact, vandalism is a bigger concern than theft. It was stolen 2 other times after that. The criminal gangs in Europe who stole that painting, couldn't sell it, and they just left it somewhere and told the authorities. And in 1936, thieves broke into Chilham Castle in Great Britain, this enormous castle, and they stole 19 paintings, including a Rembrandt, Saskia at her toilet, and somebody ratted on these guys right away, and the police were immediately onto them, and they panicked and they burned this painting. Right? So that's the worst thing imaginable. It's like my former boss used to say, it's like imagine if they took Hamlet, and you could never see it or read it or hear it performed, it's just what's in your memory. Right? That's what happens here. This is the best image you're ever going to see of it. The bright side is the only one I can find that has been destroyed. It was over 90 years ago, or almost 90 years ago. Thieves don't destroy them because they're still valuable even if you can't sell them, as I just explained. But that brings me to the bane of my existence, the 1990 Gardner Museum heist. And I will tell you, many of you have probably seen documentaries or podcasts about this. I can tell you, I've never watched the Netflix documentary. I have no use for it. I don't like those things. The great example I can give you is the Gardner case file that I share with the FBI. The FBI has given me access to the case file. At this point, it's about 60,000 pages, none of which the documentarians have access to, right? So what you're seeing when you watch these things is a little smidgen based on news stories that are either accurate or fantasy. And every time someone comes to me and says, you know what really bugged me in the documentary? They said, have you guys seen this documentary? They said in the documentary that there were kids on the street that night and the FBI never interviewed them. How could that be? What's going on? It's like, well, no, they interviewed them. Of course they do. I have the interviews right here. And that happens a lot. So a lot of these things you see are just completely inaccurate. So I don't really like to participate in those. If you ever see, I'm in lockstep. So I have an FBI agent who's my partner. We've been together for 17 years. And we're in complete lockstep. We've never even had a disagreement. And we're best friends, and like, if he doesn't do a show, I won't do a show. And if there's certain people participating, we won't do it at all. I think the last one we did was like CBS Sunday Morning or something, where we both participated, because they seem to be very ethical in their approach. For those of you who don't know how the heist went down, it was 1:24 in the morning, and thieves came to the employee entrance on Palace Road. It's a one-way street next door to Simmons College, which is now called Simmons University. And that's a little joke for someone in the audience. So anyway, they go to the employee entrance. There's 2 guards at the time working overnight, and they hit the buzzer, and they say, Boston police were responding to a disturbance in the compound. And there's a guard at the watch desk, not dissimilar from this, as a matter of fact, and his partner's upstairs doing rounds. And overnight guards are really just there because they're checking for smoke, water damage. No, they're not there. They're not Navy SEALs, right? They're there to observe and report, right? Something happens, call somebody, that's it. And so the kid's sitting at the desk, and when he hears this over the intercom, Boston police responding to a disturbance in the compound, he buzzes them in, and the gardener has a man trap. So like one door opens, you come in, the door closes, the next guy. And that's what happened. But when he did that, he violated the rules. The protocol was, and is anywhere, I'm not giving away any state secrets here. If the police come and you haven't called them overnight, you call the police. You just dial 911, say, hey, there's police here, I didn't call them, did you dispatch them? Fail safe, right? If they didn't dispatch them, they're on their way. If they did, now you know you can let them in. He didn't do that, and they came in. Once they entered, the fatal flaw here was that the museum had only one layer of security overnight, right? You have to, when you're securing something, you have to put the president or your family or Air Force One or a museum in the center and build a lot of concentric circles around it. So you have to be extremely lucky to steal something, because if you get to one hurdle, there's more and more and more. But once he let them in, it was over. It was over, right? So they're dressed as cops. They come in, and one of the cops does all the talking. Pretend that's me. His partner stands over to the side. The cop says to the kid behind it, and I say kid because he's in his early 20s. He says to him, yeah, we got this call about a disturbance. Are you alone tonight? And the kid says, no, there's one other guy here. Well, get him down here. And it takes about 30 seconds for the other guy to come down. Because like a maniac, I've walked it a bunch of times and timed myself. And then there's 2 guards there, right? When the 2 guards are together, the cop says to the kid behind the desk, you look familiar to me. Do I know you from somewhere? The kid says, I don't think so. And he said, well, let me see your ID. So he hands over the ID, and he says, yeah, I do know you. There's a warrant out for you. Come over behind that desk. And the kid does. So now the guards are away from the duress button. Right? So that tells you the cops had some inside information of getting him away from the duress button. But the question arises, how does the cop know he didn't hit it already? Right? So there's a lot of inside info. And a thing you should remember is that museum thefts, upwards of 90% of the time, involve an insider. So that could be someone who's complicit in the actual heist, someone who gave information, or someone who said things they shouldn't have said to the wrong guy, right? World War II, the motto was loose lips sink ships, and that's true today, especially in museum security. So now he has the 2 guys away from the alarm, right? And the cop says to him, you 2, you're under arrest, assume position, which is an old cop show thing. And they do, they stand up against the wall, and the cops handcuff them. And once they have handcuffs on them, cop says, gentlemen, this is a robbery. We're not here to harm you. We're just here for the art. Don't put up a fight. And the kid that let them in famously says, they don't pay us enough to put up a fight. And that's a snarky, annoying thing to say, but it's accurate, right? He's not supposed to put up a fight. Not to mention, I think he's 5'5", at like 120 pounds at the time. He's not going to put up a fight against these guys. So now they're handcuffed. The thieves take duct tape, and they wrap duct tape around their handcuffs, around their eyes, like this, like he's Marley's ghost or something, to keep his mouth closed. And they lead him down into the basement, and they take one, and they seat him on the floor. So he has cuffs on. They take out another set of cuffs and cuff his cuffs to a pipe on the floor. They take the kid that let them in and they bring him all the way deep into the basement, which is really odd. That's a very unusual thing to do in a heist. And they do the same with him. They cuff him. And then the thieves make their way upstairs. Now, in that database I keep, I can tell you that under the normal curve, our heists are in the 3 to 9 minute range, right? It's 3 minutes is the mode is probably closer to 3 minutes, right? But you don't see them past 9 minutes. The thieves are in the Gardner Museum for 24 minutes before they even start stealing anything. That's an inordinate amount of comfort. So they definitely know the system. And they probably have police scanners on them. So that's the Gardner Museum for people who haven't seen it. And that's just the courtyard, we call it. And Mrs. Gardner built it. It opened in 1903. She passed away in 1924. But it's not a house museum, it's a museum. She built it saying the country needed a great museum. So she built this, and it's a really spectacular place. And it's still the only place in the world that's built by, financed by, designed by, named for a woman. And it's really, I always say that if we're going to put women on money, I would say she should be one of them, right? Because when she passes away, she doesn't leave this multi-billion-dollar collection to her family. She says this museum is for the education and enjoyment of the public forever. And she leaves an endowment and a condition that nothing can ever change. You cannot move the art. You can't take a Rembrandt and move it here. Everything has to stay exactly as she left it, except for the horticulture. So it's a spectacular place. If you haven't been, next time you're in Boston, you should really try to see it. What you're looking at, that second floor here, right there where the stairs lead to, is the Dutch room. And that's the first room the thieves go to. Because the target of this heist is Rembrandt. And that's where the 4 Rembrandts are. These are the descriptions of the thieves. You can see why it's so hard to identify these guys. Now, there were 2 thieves, and the guards couldn't remember for sure or agree on which one had a mustache or a fake mustache. Right? And that sounds crazy, but it's not. Eyewitness accounts are notoriously unreliable. Because even as I look at you, I'm not looking at you saying, I need to remember because I'm going to have to describe this guy to a composite sketch artist tomorrow morning. I'm just looking at you, right? And it's really hard to give a description later. So on top of that, these guys are as nondescript as 2 Boston guys can be. They're somewhere in their early 30s, the guards say. The guards are in their early 20s. If you talk to a guard now, they'll say, when I was in my early 20s, I thought early 30s was old, right? So they could have been over 40. Forget the age, okay? How about the drawings? The drawings are terrible. It doesn't even look like them, okay? But there was one guy with round face and one guy with narrow face. That's most of you here. They both have dark hair. They both have dark eyes. They're about average height. One was wearing probably fake wire rim glasses. They spoke with a Boston accent. How are you supposed to find them? You can't. So these things are only good for elimination, right? And believe it or not, they're still important because I get thousands of phone calls and emails and letters from people about the Gardner theft. Countless. I have a database of that too. And over the years, especially, I shouldn't say over many, but since you guys got your painting back, I keep getting people saying that these are the thieves of the Gardner Museum. And let me tell you, these people will not stop. And when you tell them, no, listen, see the guy on the right? It was definitely a man. Oh, no, you don't know that. Listen, it was definitely a man. It was not Rita Alter. The guy on the left, Jerry Alter, looks a little like this drawing, right? But a lot of people do. I wish it was them. Because then you would have went to the guest bedroom and found my painting. It wasn't them. This is the guard that let the thieves in, so you can see the duct tape around his face and his head, and it's around his wrist too. They had taken the handcuffs off by this time. But I'd like to show this picture just to show you the MO of the thieves, how they did this, and also to remind you I was not the security director when this heist happened. It's because cranberry colored corduroys would never fly if I was the boss. But this is a good indication of this guy though, because I'm not pointing fingers at him. You know, people mess up. He messed up in a big way. He messed up and the results were the biggest property theft in human history. Right? But his approach to the job, as you can tell by the fact that he didn't wear his uniform. And he had this fanny pack on, and seriously didn't have the uniform pants on, and his shirt was unbuttoned, but the tie-dye shirt, just no regard for the museum. And it shows in the performance. But on top of that, he's a victim of a traumatizing crime, so I don't want to sound like I'm being too harsh on him. These are the Rembrandts that were stolen. Now, Mrs. Gardner had 4 Rembrandts, 3 were stolen. They tried to take the 4th and they forgot it. And I'll show you a picture of that. But Mrs. Gardner's collection is highlighted by, she doesn't have the most Rembrandts of any museum, but she always has really historically important ones. So on the top right, you see a portrait of a lady and gentleman in black. It's pretty big, it's about 4 feet tall. It's a pretty traditional double portrait, Dutch portrait. The top left-hand corner is an etching, 2 inches by 2 inches, so you can see the variance there. Not especially valuable in terms of dollars, but every item is valuable when it comes to art, right? And interestingly, when the thieves stole that little etching, instead of taking the little frame, they were so comfortable, they took this whole frame apart, had 9 screws in the back, and just stood there. And to give you an illustration that art thieves don't know art, this guy's stealing an etching worth a couple of $100,000, and while he's doing it, he's standing beneath a Rubens portrait and a crushing of Van Dyke, and he's wasting his time unscrewing this little etching. In the center is probably the most famous painting in the heist in terms of visibility, and it was probably the most famous painting in Boston at the time, and it's Storm of the Sea of Galilee. Mrs. Gardner called it Christ Still in the Water. And it's really important because it's the only seascape Rembrandt ever painted. And it's very large, it's 5 feet by 4 feet, and you can't make it out here really, but it's Christ just waking up because the apostles are scared about the storm. They're all rushed and worried. And in the center, a 13th apostle is looking at you, and it's Rembrandt. It's the self-portrait of Rembrandt in the middle. So it's really popular in the city. And those 2 big Rembrandts are the 2 paintings that were cut from their frames. And unlike Woman Ochre, it's very, very unlikely that these paintings were rolled. People imagine that they were rolled, but there's no evidence that they were. These were relined over the years. So it's not just a canvas, they were triple lined. So it was canvas, animal glue, canvas, animal glue, canvas. So it had the consistency of sort of like cardboard. And if you try to roll cardboard, you see what happens right away. It's a waste of time. And there would have been a lot of chips. And there were not a lot of chips. They were just flecks from the cutting. So we believe they were carried out as they hung. The rest of the works featured 5 works by Degas. You can see a couple of sketches here on the left, a couple of watercolors on the top right. I only have 4 of them here because this one here is just a duplicate. There were 2 of those that were stolen. In the bottom right-hand corner, you see a Napoleonic finial, which doesn't really make sense when you look at the heist, right? Because they walked by works by Raphael and Botticelli and Michelangelo and took a Napoleonic finial. And a Chinese gu, which was the oldest thing in the museum, but in terms of dollars, looking at it from a thief point of view, doesn't make sense. And the top center is a landscape by Govert Flake, but it was listed as a Rembrandt up until around 1980, so I'm certain that the thieves thought they were taking a Rembrandt when they took that. And in the center, does anybody know the painting in the middle? Yes? Thank you. So that's the most valuable stolen thing in the entire world. That's the concert by Vermeer. And when you talk about the Gardner art, because I told you about her will, none of it can ever be sold for any reason. If anything's changed in the museum, her will says the entire collection is auctioned off and the money given to Harvard University. Right? So they are the true definition of pricelessness. But if you talk to connoisseurs, they will tell you that if the Leonardo went for $450 million 3 years ago. Was it 3 or 4? 3 or 4 years ago? Then this is worth that ballpark. So we say the Gardner stolen art is worth $500 million, but that's very low ball. It's worth much more than that. Top left-hand corner, I always leave for last, is a painting called Chez Tortoni by Edward Manet. And that was stolen in a different manner. It was on the first floor, not the second floor. Everything else was second floor. This was in the blue room on the first floor. And interestingly, at no point in the evening did the thieves set off the alarms on the first floor. So it's a big mystery as to how this was taken and whether they took it at all. And something else happened to it. Here's a crime scene photo of the Dutch room, the next one. It's like the nightmare scenario for any security director, right? You come in and you see this big frame here called the Storm of the Sea of Galilee, and the flink is resting atop it. In the center is the frame that held the concert by Vermeer. On the right, in the far right, you can see the frame that held Lady and Gentleman in Black. And on that table, it's probably hard for you guys to see, but on that table on the right is the little frame that held the etching as well. This is a picture of the Rembrandt that was taken down from the wall, turned around and leaned against that chest and forgotten. I've heard, again, I haven't seen the documentary, but I've heard conjecture that it was too heavy, and that's why they didn't take it. That's not the case. The flink is the same size. It's on an oak panel, it's the same size. There's no reason they didn't take it other than, again, thank heavens they didn't take it. And you notice there's a Dürer on the wall too, that they didn't touch even though they took this etching. Please don't take a photograph of this one. That's a close-up of the frame when the painting's cut. So you guys have an experience with that, right? So this black line, if you can see it down the left-hand side here, between the rebet and the stretcher, was some of what's left of Storm of the Sea of Galilee. So you can see, just like with Woman Over, when people hear paintings cut from its frame, they picture these jagged edges, and it's not. It's a straight cut. It's not perfectly straight. But we have, just like you guys did, the template, so we know what the shape of the stolen painting should be. And we know, more importantly, what's on the back. So when con men call me, and they constantly call me and say, I have your painting, I say, oh, that's wonderful. So just take a quick photo and send me the back. Not the front, just the back. They hang up and you never hear from them again because nobody knows what's on the back except for me, thankfully. So that's what the Dutch room looks like now with the empty frames. The big one there in the center is the Storm of the Sea of Galilee. On the far right, you can see the one that held the concert. Now, before I leave the Gardner, I should mention, because it's worthwhile mentioning, that we have a reward for the paintings. Well, we have a reward used to recover the painting. So it's $10 million. It's the biggest private reward ever offered. And it is for information given to me that leads me directly to the paintings. So people call me up the day before I flew here. I had someone texting me on WhatsApp telling me they know where the paintings are, they know who has them, they want $300,000, $150 up front, another $150 after they tell me who has them. And then I just reply, say, here's my offer, $0. Tell me the name. If we get the paintings, you get millions of dollars. And then you never hear from them again. What a mystery, right? How that works. In 2011, just after Stanley Rembrandt's came out, an 83rd Rembrandt was stolen. It was a drawing. It was called The Judgment. And it wasn't highly recognizable. And it wasn't highly valuable. It was valued at $250,000. So it didn't have that. It did fall into the area where maybe someone could sell this thing. So the LA County Sheriff's Department did something really smart. Remember, it's 2011. It's before social media really hit its stride. They used social media, though, to get the image out there, and it became highly recognizable within hours, which was brilliant. And then I coordinated with them, and I was in the media in LA, and I kept saying to the thieves, you've not stolen a picture, you've stolen a problem. You can't sell it. Leave it somewhere, call the authorities, and hope this whole thing goes away. And on the third day after the heist, they left it at a church and called, and they got the thing back. And the reason I tell you the story is because the internet holds some promise, but it has to be used like an Amber Alert, right? It can't be every time because people won't pay attention. But in the right scenario, when things happen very quickly, and you can get that information out, the internet can be of use in getting works out. And it was of use in Woman Over, because the museum here did a really great job, a really smart thing by capitalizing on the anniversary, getting that image out there, and when the people at I always say it was an antique shop, but the people who did the estate sale started researching this thing, they had no trouble finding out what it was right away because your museum was so smart, proactive, it never gave up on its painting. So that's this ability to spread information quickly saved, perhaps, Woman Over. If they didn't find it on the internet, they might have just kept it, not out of malintent, but because they didn't know what it was. Most important thing, though, that I can leave you with, I've tried to, and I hope I've explained to you that you can't sell masterpieces, right? These things don't get sold, there's no Dr. No, they're not hanging on the wall of the Sultan of Brunei, they're hidden, right? Which is worse, because if I have to find the Gardner paintings, they're going to be hidden in some drywall or in some attic, right? They're not going to be in the wall of some billionaire who passes away, and, you know, except in one case. That's how these things really happen. The most important message, though, is my latest book, The Woman Who Stole From Here, is available everywhere. So I hope that you read this, because the interesting thing about this book is it's another outlier. And the outlier in this case is that every time I would give speeches, people would say, it's all men. Have women stolen masterpieces? And I said, no, except Rose Dugdale. And Rose Dugdale's life is something that you won't believe if you decide to read this book. So I hope you check out The Woman Who Stole From Here. I thank you so much for having me here in Tucson, where I've never been before. And I hope it matters to you that I've been treated so incredibly well here. What a great trip it's been. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I can't give you details about my investigation, that would be improper, but I will answer to the best of my ability. But thank you very, very much for coming here to talk tonight.